Welcome everybody to our webinar today on queer parenting, which my friend Carla Grant here will be presenting. I just want to let everybody know that the session is recorded. So if you know anyone that wasn't able to attend, or if you have to leave early, we will be sending out the recording a little bit later on, probably early next week, considering that it's Thursday already. If anybody has any questions for Carla during the presentation, you can use either the chat or the Q&A function, and we'll be monitoring those, probably answering most of the questions towards the end. If anybody wants to remain anonymous, you can use the Q&A function, and I will not share your name when I am repeating your question. Also, I want to clarify that this is a space that we honor and respect each other. So if anybody is not honoring and respecting the other attendees or our presenter or the topic, you will be removed. And with that, Carla, would you mind sharing your presentation so that I can read our land acknowledgement? Thank you. So while our attendees may be from anywhere across the country or even in the world, we are being hosted today by the School of Continuing Education at MacEwan University, which is in Edmonton, Alberta. So our land acknowledgement is specifically for Treaty 6 territory in Canada here. We acknowledge that the land on which we gather in Treaty 6 territory is the traditional gathering place for many Indigenous people. We honor and respect the history, languages, ceremony, and culture of the First Nations, Métis, and Inuit who call this territory home. The First Peoples' connection to the land teaches us about our inherent responsibility to protect and respect Mother Earth. With this acknowledgement, we honor the ancestors and children who have been buried here, missing and murdered Indigenous women and men, and the process of ongoing collective healing for all human beings. We are reminded that we are all treaty people and of the responsibility we have to one another. And with that, I am going to pass it over to Carla.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you for coming today. It's really nice to see some names in the chat, a few that I recognize, which makes me even happier. My name is Carla Grant. My pronouns are she and her. And I am here today to talk a little bit about my path of queer parenting. Trying to get it right, or at least less wrong. And as we go through today, you will quickly realize that I'm human, just like all other parents are human, and humans make mistakes. And as well-intentioned as we are about trying to get it right, we don't always hit the nail on the head. And that's okay. And we learn and we move forward. Like I said, as we go through this story, I'm going to share with you a lot about my family and about my experience as a parent of a trans child who transitioned over 10 years ago now. And she's 22 now. So over the past 10 years, some things have gone really well and some things have not. So I'm here to share my experiences with you as a parent. So my plan for today is, and I know Mackenzie said that you're welcome to share questions, Q&A, or in the chat. I do have the chat open. I would love for some questions, comments, anything that you'd like to share. I think the biggest thing that I learned out of all of it was that the only way to do queer parenting really wrong was to do it by myself. And I certainly did find supports and places to learn from. And that sharing and the learning from each other is really what made this journey even manageable for me. So I don't know how many people here are parents, if you're here out of just interest, if you are an educator or have queer, and I'm using the word queer parenting, queer being all encompassing of sexual and gender diversity, expression and orientation, that we all come from different places and do things Knowing the title of the presentation, though, I expect some of you are parents and some of you maybe are anticipating being a parent where this might come up. So welcome to the unknown. We're going to spend a little bit of time on my story, our story, and our context, and the expectations of what my parenting path, what I thought it was going to look like 20 years ago, and then what it kind of turned into. We're going to spend some time on a couple of the things that did well, and definitely some time on things that could have done differently. And the reason that I share this stuff is because I just overshare. And for those of you that have met me, you'll know this. I overshare about everything, and I don't know if it's just a personal lack of personal awareness, maybe, or just some really wide boundaries. I think we learn a lot from each other, and I think we learn a lot from mistakes. Professionally, I am a pharmacist and I'm an educator. I work at Northwest College teaching in the pharmacy technician program. In our medication safety world in pharmacy, we have something that's referred to in the literature as error wisdom. And that it's the learning from things gone badly that improves things that could go better next time. And that we don't have to personally make all the mistakes to get the learning that has happened from other people making those mistakes. So in sharing stories, it's, the intention is never for shock and awe. It's that when I listen to other people's stories, sometimes I hear something that I'm like, I could apply that to my life, or that's a good idea for how to handle this different situation, right? So that error wisdom, I think it's gold. I do. I think that it's what keeps us out of catastrophic situations where we didn't really intend to be. And then I'd like to spend a little bit of time on where I found support as a parent. And if there's anything else that we need to touch on, please send it in the Q&A or post it up in the chat, and we can go there. So a little bit about us. My family, our family of origin, and well, I guess it is our family of origin. All the stories that I share with you today, I'm sharing with permission from everybody that's involved in the story. I do, we use names, we use people. You're going to see a lot of photos today. The people, I have learned one of the things that I did not do well, that it's really important to get consent before sharing information, as opposed to sharing and then trying to fix it afterwards. So our family, like probably most of yours, is a blended family. Not most, but it is a blended family. It's complex, and it's our family is loving. So blended family, originally, I was married to Ian, who on this, oh, maybe yours didn't change, sorry. So this is us. This is a cartoon that Ella made so my child, one of my kids made in 2013, that I thought was actually a really good depiction of our family. So this guy here on the left, this would be Ian. I'm going to try and get my cursor up here. My laser pointer. So this, I hope you can see my little dot, is Ian. So this is now my ex-husband. This is the father of my older two children. So there's Jackson, who is my middle child. Jackson is a very stereotypical gendered boy. He plays hockey, he's rough and tough, he likes beer, he likes steak. What society would typically ascribe to being a cishet male. Nice guy, nice guy. This is Ella. So you can see in this image that Ella is definitely the one that is not looking very happy. Ella was the least unhappy, or the most unhappy of everybody here, probably because Ella at this point was Elliot. Again, here I use the dead name with permission. This is me at the time. Apparently I was skinny, which is nice. I did have dark hair. I'm also pregnant here. Right? And so there's another little person on the way named Jet. And this was the new boyfriend that had just moved in named Arthur. So at the time, these were like the 5 plus the newborn on the way key players in our family when Ella actually transitioned. And this has continued to ebb and flow over the past 10 years. Right, as Ian has remarried, as Ella has had new step siblings, as Arthur has, was with us for a number of years and then moved out, and there's another boyfriend, and then the baby came along. So, just like all families, it's complex, it's moving, there's lots of dynamics. And I share that with you because paying attention to the needs of everybody else in the family was part of what made queer parenting so hard. Is that so much of my time and energy was focused on the transition and the dating and the P-flag meetings and the support and the advocacy, that I didn't have a lot of extra time to go to hockey games, like without complexity, right? And I had a newborn too, so lots of stuff going on. So Ella was born in 2000 and Jackson was born in 2002. So this image would have been about 2012, right? When Ella was in kindergarten, even before that, we had her in to see a gender psychiatrist. And the question was, what do we do with this femininity? What do we do? And at the time, now keep in mind, this was like 15 years ago, the gender psychiatrist in Alberta said to us, keep it home, keep it safe. So that meant no wearing dresses to school. Ella was allowed to dress up, but she could only do it at home, right? So we had little inklings into this gender piece very early on. Ella was always very effeminate. But Ian and I, as parents, didn't know the difference between sexuality and gender. And so both of us, I think, were thinking this child is going to be gay. And we were fine with that. Totally fine with that. And we're fine with trans too. But it was just because we didn't know. I didn't know the difference between the two. And then not much happened until 2012. And in 2012, there was a period of time in Alberta up until 2012 that gender reassignment surgery or gender affirming surgeries was not covered as a provincial service by the government. And in 2012, they reinstated coverage for gender affirming surgeries. And Ella saw this in a newspaper article, like back when they made newspapers. Had them on the kitchen table. And one morning she came in and, this is our tip, everybody has one, is a coming out story. And Ella said, did you know that gender assignment surgery is covered by Alberta Health and Wellness? And I said, no, I had no idea. And Ella said, I didn't even know that was a thing. That's what I need. So there we were. All of a sudden, now I'm a queer parent, right? But I was before. I just didn't have a name for it, right? So just like everyone that lands into this role, my first text was to my mom saying, "Oh God, like what are we gonna do? What is this?" Right? Which is actually one of my first errors, was sharing that information without consent. I needed someone to talk to, but Ella wasn't ready for me to share that information yet. So over the course of the next 10 years, as you can imagine, if you've done it or are you anticipating heading down this path, there is a few things that I did well as a parent and that we did well as a family. And I'm all about gold stars. I like being acknowledged for things done well. I like acknowledging other people for things done well. What did we do well? Um, we had really good communication in our family, and there's evidence to support this. She told me that she was trans, right? And that was an honor that she trusted me enough to come forth with that information. And I mean, that is gold star parenting. When your kids are willing to come to you with the hardest stuff, you're on the right track, even if you hit some holes along the way, right? And we talked about stuff. We talked about a lot of stuff. And that's not different than parenting a child where gender or sexuality isn't a big topic of conversation, right? We had to talk a lot. The image here is Ella and Dr. Broussard in Montreal. This was in 2019, so about 3 years ago now, where she eventually did have gender affirming surgery, bottom surgery in Montreal. And a long path to get there, and not all trans people have surgery. Like, this is not the path for everybody, but it was the path for Ella. And the reason that I have shared this photo is because of this wide open communication. Ella, and I'm so grateful for this, allowed me to walk this journey with her. And she allowed me to walk most of her transition with her. Sorry, my nose is really itchy if you're wondering why I'm scratching my nose. But in Montreal, it really hit me especially. She so as you can imagine, very big, intense surgery, very painful surgery, long, difficult recovery, a very emotional surgery. But she really did let me be part of some very physically intimate and emotionally intimate details with her, and I think that that helped us. But and like I said, I'm very grateful that she let me be in that. Another big thing with communication was pronouns. Um, and this started like fast and hard. All of it, like, we voted on a name and that was it. We changed. It was not easy, of course. And neurologically, it's not easy because your brain has this very well defined neural pathway that you don't even need to think about those pronouns when you've been using them for so long. It's just a really deeply ingrained habit. But we all worked really hard to change our pronouns immediately. And for Ella, that felt like respect. It felt like she was valued. It felt like her name and her pronouns mattered to us. It felt like we were putting her first. And we were. I changed her name in my phone immediately. Um, we actually had a code word for when I would accidentally misgender her, so that when we were out in public, she didn't need to make a big deal about it. The word was potato. So every time I accidentally said he, she would just say potato. So that I'd be like, oh, I did it again, just to draw my attention to it, right? But she was kind about it. I actually had a harder time with switching from saying the boys to saying the kids than I ever did with she and he. But it took work, and I was willing to put in that work, right? This communication extended to her friends as well. So over the course of the last 10 years, I've had countless texts and Facebook messages and Instagram messages from Ella's friends saying, I've had this thing happen. How how can I deal with it? How should I bring this up to my parents? Who do I need to see? So somehow along the way, I became a person who was safe to talk to. And I think that that's really important. It's important for your child, and it's important to show that support, not just to show up, to have it and make it obvious for their friends as well, their whole peer circle, probably a lot of which are going to need the same types of support. The next thing that we did really well was learning about everything, everything, even if it was uncomfortable. So Ella and I spent a lot of time together and by ourselves learning about, transition specific stuff, but also, the sexuality stuff, right? About safe dating, because when she originally transitioned, she was questioning sexuality as well, and so had dated girls, or people who were more feminine, which was new to me and new to her, right? Um, so we did a lot of this learning together. We learned about, like, gaff underwear and how to tuck properly. We ordered lots of different types and brands of gaff, and went in and bought sports underwear and tried different tapes and on and on and on to try and make her physically more comfortable. Breast forms, same thing. We bought a lot of boobs. We bought lots of bras. We bought lots of bathing suits, wigs. She's been very dysphoric about her hair. So we had wigs all over the place. We actually went on a backpacking trip through Europe at some point in her transition. Maybe she was 15 or 16, and she wore a wig every day all the way through, Budapest and Poland in the sweltering heat, just because she felt better that way. Right? But we did a lot of learning, right? About physical things, and about the community, and about gender in general. Um, and a lot of this, now that I look back, was actually quite amusing and quite funny. I had a baby, and like a young child in one arm and a hockey stick in the other. So a lot of this we were kind of doing on the fly, um, uh, trying to maneuver the needs of a 14-year-old hockey player and a 2-year-old on top of it, and a bunch of dogs. We had 4 dogs as well. Right. I think we did a good job of anticipating what potholes we were going to hit. We knew that the whole process of coming out, although it wasn't that big of a deal in our small household, was a bigger deal in um, more extended families and friend circles. And part of this was just the experience of listening to other families talking about what had happened with their families. It does not always go well. And we knew that that could be a big problem, right? I have lots of cousins. We have lots of aunts and uncles. I love them. They're a big part of our lives. They don't live close anymore, but we do. And we wanted to be respectful and mindful about how we shared information about gender and sexuality with them. We never tolerated anything back than full embracing of Ella. And that was a hard line to take. Like, if you were not willing to fully embrace us and our family and this diversity, then for now, it's important that we not interact with you. And we were willing to make some hard cuts. We didn't have to make that many, because most of my friends and family are amazing, and they were amazing friends before Ella transitioned, and they're still amazing friends. For our family, we actually wrote a letter. My mom and I drafted it together with Ella's help. We did it, and we actually snail mailed it. And we did it this way to give everybody some processing time before they would be expected to publicly respond, or privately respond to us. We thought it was important that Ella, especially as someone who was younger, didn't have that immediate kind of emotional recoil coming back at her, and not understanding that your first impression of something is not the truth. Is not necessarily the way that you feel about it. It's just shock. And she didn't need to see that. And neither did we, really. So we wrote a letter and sent it out. We gave people a lot of time. I withdrew from social media so that I had a chance to share privately with everyone that needed to know before they found out publicly. And mostly, like 99% of it went really well. People that did not like Elliot did not like Ella, but that was a personality thing, not a gender issue. Ella's a lot. She's a big personality. Um, and then our system problems, and the system actually I think is harder than the people, because systems are slow to change. And by system, I mean the school system, the healthcare system, the vital statistics, changing your name, the systems, the paperwork, the immunization system. So we tried to engage with that, and I'm a person that's not scared of doing that. So I was in the principal's office a lot. I was on the phone to the health people a lot. I was on the phone with the doctor, the gender clinic. We fought really hard, and we did well. I was relentless about it, and to make sure that she had the care that she needed. I didn't accept a 2-year wait list. We would have driven anywhere to get her the help that she needed, when we needed it. Right. But it took a lot of time, and it certainly took a toll, on me and on the rest of the family. We did a really good job celebrating Ella. I'm going to share this one picture and then I'll just go back. So this is a picture of Ella's estrogen party. So she's about 16 here, 15, 16. And what she's got in her hand there is actually her first dose of estrogen. So she'd been on blockers for a couple years at this point, but estrogen. So I went to Dairy Queen and I had them make an ice cream cake and wrote the word estrogen on it. And the little one working at the counter said, "How do you spell that?" And I was like, "Oh, that worries me a little bit." So anyways, we got our estrogen cake and we bought everything pink to be as quirky and ridiculous as gender parties could be. Pink balloons and pink pop and pink decorations, and all of her friends came over. And me as a pharmacist, I always think about, when you go to the pharmacy and start on your blood pressure pills or start on your osteoporosis pills for the first time, no one goes home and has a party. This was such a big deal for her, such a big deal that we needed to market. And we celebrated a lot of things like this because it was a big deal for her in evaluating her and this new embodiment that she had. Right? Um, and we shopped. I hate shopping. I absolutely hate shopping, but I was willing to do it for her. We took photos. We have, I have hundreds of photos. We had fun. We learned some girl things together, or things that she thought she needed to master to be comfortable in her feminine presentation. The other thing that went well and continues to go well is advocacy. I feel better when I'm doing things. I am an acts of service person. Ella is a gift receiver, so I made sure that I gave her lots of gifts, even if they were like boobs and bras and stuff. And shoes, shoes, so many shoes. But advocacy was a big thing for me. And I know, and I asked Ella when I was getting ready for this, we had a good talk yesterday about it. And I said, "For you, what went well? What did I do well?" And she said, "You always had my back. You always had my back. And you were willing to really fight to make it right." Right. And so we had a couple big battles. We couldn't, at the time that she transitioned, so 2012, you still couldn't change gender on a birth certificate without surgery, which is wrong on a million different levels. But primarily, Ella couldn't have surgery because she was only 12. But we needed to change the gender marker so that she could live comfortably and without being outed continually. Right. So that was a human rights complaint in 2013, and that was subsequently changed. She was outed at school. like 7 times in 3 months. Not intentionally, by accident, because of the school system that we couldn't change when she was in grade 8. And the consequence of this is kids don't want to go to school. Right? It was emotionally devastating for her. And so I took it on, and I took it on hard. We filed a human rights or a privacy complaint to the Alberta government and won. It is illegal to accidentally out students against the Edmonton Public School Board, and they're still making changes with that regards today. It's not perfect, but it's better than it was. I engaged with the health systems. I had numerous meetings with Health Minister Hoffman in the first couple of years to try and get things changed. I sit on the SOGI Provincial Advisory Council for Alberta Health Services to try and engage the systems change that we need to support sexual and gender diverse kids. They're not old enough to be at the table, so I try and do that on my own. So I was a social justice warrior. Ella was not. Ella didn't want anything to do with this. She just wanted me to go and fix it. So I tried. But those are things that made me that did help pave our path, and for others as well. Sure, we learned a lot along the way. What did not go so well? Well, a lot of things did not go well. So this photo here is me. I'm crying. I don't cry very often, but sometimes I do. I will tell you that queer parenting is exhausting. Parenting is exhausting. And you add any level, and everybody has something, right? And there's no harder. There's just hard. You can't compare someone's challenge with a sexual or gender diverse child to a parent who has a child on the autism spectrum, to a parent who has severe allergies, to like also physical disabilities. Everybody has a hard, at like 1,000%. This one was really an emotional hard. And I don't do emotions really well. So that was a challenge for me. It did not go well. I needed to be doing and not like learning and loving. It was a challenge for me. But specifically, I shared too soon. As soon as I knew what was going on with Ella, I told my mom and I told my closest friends immediately, like within minutes of Ella going out the door. Right? I wouldn't do that next time. I would have waited for permission. It needs to be the child who leads. It needs to be the child who leads when they're ready to tell other people. It needs to be the adolescent. It needs to be them that tell you when it's time to move forward. And I didn't do that well. So if I could go back, I would do that. And I would say probably the same thing about I wrote a book, and we'll talk about that just briefly, but I found a lot of comfort in reading and writing. And at the end of that, I actually published the book and have consent, and everybody who was in the book has read it and commented on it, and or with full consent. But looking back, I probably would have just waited 5 years to make sure that I still had the same insights on those stories. So I've really gained a lot of appreciation over the next 10 years of just like waiting a bit, waiting until it's not still happening to make sure that your insights on it. And of course it changes over time. But I shared too soon for sure. And the without consent is just about telling my mom. But I needed her. I should have asked Ella. I still should have asked Ella. The second thing that I did not do well was that I didn't understand, I did not appreciate the intensity of her dysphoria. I both Ian and I, actually, I'm going to explain this. I'll show you this. So this is Ella as well. Ella is not the girl next door. I guess it depends on what street you grew up on. Maybe she was the girl next door. But typically speaking, and this is from her father, right? He didn't like the kind of girl that Ella was. He wanted, it says, kind of this, if you are going to transition, then you are going to be modest and demure and well-spoken and intellect, like, this ideal of, if I had a daughter, how would I have raised that daughter? Right? But they don't turn out that way anyways. Any parent knows. We have good intentions, but it's not going to go that way. And Ella, when she transitioned, went straight from like a feminine grade 7 boy to this. She really was, I call her the cross between an Alfred Hitchcock leading lady and a hooker. Like, it was very everything you have ever seen in a movie. Ella also has autism, so she has this kind of skewed version of the reality other than media. So we had stilettos every day at school. We had like, these pictures here are everyday pictures. Like, these are not dressed up for an event. The pictures are staged but this is just like her typical thing. And Ian really had a hard time with that. And I picked up on that from him. But I should have shut down Ian, not shutting down Ella. She needed to dress like this to suppress the dysphoria, to make herself feel comfortable, right? Wearing jeans made her feel dysphoric. It made her feel boyish. It reminded her that she had a boy body. And I use the word boy very generically there. She needed her hair long. And at one point, I forced her to get her hair cut because it was in bad shape, and she was relentlessly nagging me about what she was going to do with her hair. And so I cut it all off. And she cried and cried and cried. And I didn't know then, but I do now, that it was about the intensity of that dysphoria. So I would have learned a little bit more about that. And I would have done a better job of honoring the essence of her, as opposed to what others in society thought that girl should be. Maybe that's the same thing as having a cisgender female child. I don't know that because I don't have one. I'd love to know if any of you do, what you feel about that. The next thing that didn't go well was that I think, and I'm pretty sure that I was soft on some other parenting basics because the rest of this stuff was really hard. So I, we spent so much time engaging with healthcare systems and doctor's appointments and endocrinologists and psych referrals and PFLAG meetings and new clothes and GAF and like all of the other kind of extraneous supporting stuff that happened during a transition, that I didn't spend a lot of time on the typical stuff: smoking, drinking, drugs, focusing on school, focusing on career, focusing on my other children, and focusing on my other responsibilities of the house. At this time as well, I mean, Arthur is gone by now. So Arthur is gone by the time Jet was 3. So I'm single parenting 3 kids and 3 dogs, working full time. So yes, I was busy. Absolutely. I had a lot going on. But I still think it's important to focus on those really core the core values of parenting, and that this didn't go well with Ella. She definitely has addiction and food, um, eating disorders going on as well. Always has. Oh, I mean, I did it when we need to. She was into ADAC when she was in grade 10, or the the division of Alberta Health Services, formerly known as ADAC, I guess. Um, but that kind of slipped. And probably for a couple years, Jackson didn't get the attention that he needed. Right? Just to make a real clear space of connection with the other kids when something really intense is going on at home. The last thing I was going to talk about, well, two actually, fear and guilt, fear and grief, actually. So fear. This was, I think, out of all of my time spent reflecting and writing and reading and talking about Ella and to Ella, fear was a way bigger deal in all of our interactions than I recognized or realized. I did a really good job of just burying my fear. Ian, as her dad, was much more vocal about it. And I, for him though, it came out like non-support. And that was hard for Ella to hear. So, and I'll tell you what I mean by that. We went to see Dr. Wernicke, the late Dr. Wernicke, and had an excellent, what a wonderful man, and had an excellent conversation with him. And Ian was sitting in the office, and Ella was there as well. And he says to Dr. Wernicke, what is the percentage chance that this is for real? Like that this is not a phase, that this is just not going to go away. Like what I want, like some hard data here, because if this isn't real, then I'm not engaging with it. Right. And I asked him about that afterwards, and he said, there is no way that I'm going to let my child put themselves in a position where they are going to be beat up and made fun of and ostracized and marginalized and victimized if this is not 100% for sure. So he was supportive of needing to do it if it needed to be done, but also really scared of the consequences of allowing this to happen. And, for me, that turned into, how do I let my child travel this path, knowing how hard it is, knowing how dangerous it is, knowing the crap and the shit that she's going to have to deal with forever. Right? And that was a really, really hard one. And I think it's still really hard for me. So I got past it by digging into statistics. And it's true. The rates of violence and self-harm and suicidal ideation are way higher for the transgender and gender diverse community than the cisgendered matched population. Way, 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 way higher. But the numbers, these numbers of self-harming and violence and suicidal ideation and attempts fall to close of the rest of society, with the love and support of friends and family and affirming medical care. Right. And so from that, for me, that said, I have to do this because the way to keep her the most safe is to support her through this and to get the appropriate care. Right. I can't fix the violence, but I can try and make it safer. And that safety, we always came back to safety. And this is one that I still don't know where the right line is. For example, this past weekend, Ella went to a party Halloween party. She's 22. She looks fantastic. Someone buys her a drink at the party and they get talking, and she tells them that she's trans. And she does this because, like, a decade ago, I said to her, you cannot be alone with someone, like intimately, if they don't know. Because if you are in a, a, a if someone doesn't know where you are and you're alone with someone and they find out you're trans by accident, then you are at real risk of danger, way more so than any cisgendered person. And that's true. That's a fact, and it's unfortunate, but it is true. And so she tells people. And then they say, wow, that's a lot to process. Yeah, I don't, sorry. No, I'm out. And then she feels bad about herself. She feels like a freak. She doesn't, and then it happens again. So what is the trade-off to this? You have to tell them so that you're safe versus you're continually going to be shunted by society because you are who you are, and you're being honest. And I don't know where that line is yet. And I think it's really, really hard for her, that safety versus being able to live authentically. The same thing with sleepovers when she was little, into adolescence. Eventually our rule was, if they don't know you're trans, you can't sleep over at their house. Because if their parents or they find out in the middle of the night, then you could be in a really, really bad situation, right? So if you don't know them well enough, but I don't know if that's right either. And maybe that's the hard part, is that there's no right and wrong answers. Right? So we tried to be safe. But really that just comes from fear. And it's different now than it was 10 years ago. It is better, but it's still not awesome. Um, the grief piece I often hear about in PFLAG and in psychology meetings. I didn't experience grief like some trans parents have, in terms of that. I've lost I've lost my daughter. I've lost my son. I didn't experience it that way. I know a lot of people do. But I did experience grief about the expectations that I had of what their life was going to be like. Which is weird, because my expectations are fantasy anyways. So if the fantasy changes, it's still just a fantasy. But it is true. We do become attached to the idea of, and interesting, I think, when Ella first transitioned, thinking about her, trying to shift to this, Ella is a girl, Ella is my daughter. One of my sadnesses was that she wouldn't be able to have a biological baby, like, because she doesn't have a uterus. Um, but even that's a fantasy. If she did have a uterus, would she want to have a baby anyways? Would she even want me in the room as a grandma? You know? So it this grief part, really, it helped me to think of what I was grieving, and it really was my own expectations. Um, the family photos on the wall was a big one. Ella at one point asked us to take down all of our pictures. And I did, because at this point I'd realized the intensity of her dysphoria and need for that. But I didn't throw them away. I just kept them private. And now we've kind of shifted back that she's okay with them being out, and that's okay too. Couple of things that did help me along the way. PFLAG. PFLAG was a big one for me. So PFLAG is a horribly outdated acronym for the parents and friends of lesbian and gays. But really, the PFLAG groups that I found were a diverse group of both sexual and gender diverse people and their partners and their parents and their kids. And it was really fantastic. It connected me with a lot of other parents who I absolutely adore. I learned a lot. I shared a lot. It was a really good good place for me to be. I used to go on Wednesday nights. It was like my night out from the baby. I'd go to PFLAG and have poutine and PFLAG. It was my big outing. I put the GSA QSA on here because just because people talk about it, you know, there being a GSA or QSA at school. Ella didn't want anything to do with this because as a trans person going there actually outed her if they didn't know she was trans before. She didn't want to be a part of the queer community. She did not want to go to the Pride Center. She didn't want to go. She wanted to be a typical girl. She did not want to be part of the LGBTQ community. But I did. And so we kind of split ways there, and it was fine. I pursued what I needed, and she did not. So I always left it open to her to make sure that she had those connections where she needed them. And there's some fantastic groups around Edmonton. Out Loud in St. Albert is phenomenal. She wasn't interested. She wasn't interested in the mentorship. She wasn't interested in friends. She wanted to go her own way. We found some really great psychologists, and I needed that privately. Ella needed that privately so that she could bitch and complain about me and all the things I was doing wrong, which now you know there was lots. And our family. Jackson needed some counseling. Ian, you know, my ex-husband needed some counseling just to make sure that we were getting through this in the healthiest way that we could. Like I said, I read and I wrote. Social media, asterisks. Social media, I found some really good support groups on PFLAG and Instagram. There's a couple, you know, the Canadian parenting of gender diverse kids and kids on double spectrum, so autism and gender diversity. And it was good to connect with some of those parents. I found a lot of support there when I was, when Ella eventually did have surgery, for stories and error wisdom and that type of thing. But there's also a lot of fear mongering. And that's hard. So you need to take it with a grain of salt, and you need to turn it off when it's not healthy. Don't read the comments. And I found a lot of support in doing my advocacy. I felt like I was doing something helpful for the community, that was good for me, and it was good for Ian too. It was good for her dad to be able to step in and fight for her, and that was really good for both of us. So that's really my journey. Now I'm you know, will always be a queer parent. Ella is 22 now, struggling to live on her own, just like most 22-year-olds do. She is doing her own thing. Mental health gets us down more than gender ever has. Mental health is hard. Mental health is the hardest piece of this, I think. The gender is just physical changes. The mental health is the hard part. And I'm just continuing to parent along. This was the book that I was mentioning, Uncommon Girls, and I can see that Mackenzie's put that link up in Amazon or in the chat. So thank you for that. If you want to read way more about me than you've ever wanted to know, that's certainly my path.
Well, thank you very much, Carla. Yes, I'm always excited to plug your book. So I did drop that link in if anybody is interested in hearing more of Carla's story. I have read it, and I will say that it was foundational in how I viewed the queer community and transgender folks.